commentaries I read, this passage from Proverbs was called "In Praise of the Perfect Woman." Really? And I have to tell you that one of the very first things I thought of when I read it was the last time I walked in here, having had Stina cut my hair. And Ruby, I think it was, said to me, "So, nice haircut, who did it?" And I said, "Stina." And she turned around and said, "Okay, is there anything that woman can't do?" And I said, "Yes, but I'm not telling you." This is one of those over-the-top kind of descriptions. When I said at 8 o'clock, "And what does she not get to do?" Jane Pitzinger said, "Rest." I said, "Yeah, pretty much." It's intended to be complimentary, actually. It's the very last thing in the book of Proverbs. This is the end of the book, right? And Proverbs is built, I learned this week, and written and designed for, it's a book of advice, primarily written for young men who are getting ready to go out on their own and probably to marry. And so the culminating bit in the whole book is, and here's what you want to look for in a wife. And it's amazing the things she does. Depending on the commentary you read, all these kind of strong, muscular male attributes that she does so well are intended to be complimentary and intended to talk about her owning her own power. Other commentaries say, no, she doesn't really go buy land because back then women couldn't buy land, right? You just didn't do that. It wasn't, you were property. How could you go buy land if you're property, somebody's property? So, and she doesn't fight with a distaff, but she does weave. She does go out. She buys expensive stuff from Phoenicia. You got purple dye from the Phoenicians because it wasn't local. It was generated out of a particular shell, and that's where the purple color came from. Red was very expensive. So this talks about somebody who's got financial means, right, and capacity, and yet she's doing all this stuff. Another of the commentaries said, you know, there's a whole lot of doing in here, but it doesn't praise anything about who she is as a person. And isn't that a shame? And the thing that caught me up the shortest was, because of everything she is doing, what does her husband get to do?
Sit at the gate.
Sit at the city gate, which is the place where the elders and people of high respect get to sit. That put me in mind of Fiddler on the Roof. Do you remember the song about if he was really rich, right? There you see. I almost called you Douglas, but I knew better than you knew that. We'd never keep going. But I did print out the lyrics because I wanted to make sure I had this right. He starts talking about the things he would do if he was rich. First of all, he'd build a big, tall house with rooms by the dozen, right in the middle of the town, a fine tin roof and real wooden floors. There would be one long staircase just going up, and one even longer coming down, and one more leading nowhere just for show. I just love that. And then he talks about all the chickens and the geese and the ducks he'd got in the front yard to announce to everybody how wealthy he was. And then he talks about his wife, looking like a rich man's wife with a proper double chin, supervising meals to her heart's delight, strutting like a peacock. What a happy mood she's in, screaming at the servants day and night. And then he goes on, but here's the thing, here's the last verse. If I were rich, I'd have the time that I lack to sit in the synagogue and pray, and maybe have a seat by the eastern wall. And I'd discuss the learned books with the holy men 7 hours every day. That would be the sweetest thing of all. And if you've ever heard that song sung, the reverie and the prayerfulness with that verse is sung is striking compared to the kind of frivolity of the rest of it. And that's what this man gets to do, because his wife is overdoing all the other stuff, right? And what does she not get to do? Go sit at the city gates. Okay, values. So let's move on to James. James says, and it is not a rhetorical question. Every commentary I read said, this is not a rhetorical question. Who is wise and understanding among you? He was intent. Go find them. Label them. Use them as wise people. This is not about who can find the perfect wife. This is exactly the opposite. Go find these people. If you know who are the wise and understanding in your community, you know who to look to for leadership and guidance. And he goes on and he admits that there is worldly wisdom. He talks about the wisdom of the world. And he acknowledges that these people are living in the world, right? And he says, and that's not how you want to be. He says, here's the kind of wisdom you want. You want the wisdom that comes from above. It's pure, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And it generates a harvest of righteousness sown in peace for those who make peace. Did you catch the verb? Who make peace. I'm all about peace, but how often do I go out and actively make peace? What does that mean? What does that look like? How do we do that? Make peace. And then he says, if you've got conflicts and disputes, where are they coming from? What's going on here? And isn't it because you want something you can't have and they've got it and you want it and so you want to take it and there's the conflict? Isn't that worldly values and not the values we want from God? Somebody didn't approve. And then he says, resist the devil and he'll flee from you, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. That's the one bone of contention I have. God is always near to you. This is not dependent on your behavior. Back in the 70s, 80s, there was a little plaque you could get for your desk, and it said, if you don't feel close to God, guess who moved? The answer was not God. Okay, gospel. Jesus, for the second of 3 times, is walking along the way being how you follow Jesus, people on the way. And Jesus is talking very explicitly about he's going to be betrayed, he's going to be tortured, he's going to be killed, he's going to die, and then 3 days later he's going to rise again. Very explicit. What are the guys talking about? Who's the greatest among them? One of the commentaries said, be kind. The concept that Jesus was offering was so unfathomable that they simply couldn't wrap their brain around it. Don't be surprised by that. Other commentaries were kind of like, yeah, it's the disciples again, in Mark. They never get it. What strikes me is that he asks the question. He doesn't shake a finger. He doesn't chastise them. He calls them to him. He sits down, which is the position of authority and from which you teach. He takes a small child and puts it in the middle of them. Now, women were of little value. Women were property. Children were worth even less because at least women could produce. They could make fabric, they could buy produce, they could take care of the house, they could have children, hopefully sons. Children were pretty worthless. You just had to take care of them, and they couldn't do anything, right? So he takes the human being with the least value, picks that child up, puts it in his arms, and says, when you want to be the greatest, the way you do that is to be the servant of all. You need to be the servant of the servant if you want to be great. You need to be serving children who cannot in any way, shape, or form repay what you do for them. Then you are being great. That's what great looks like. It's not what the world says great looks like. That's his explicit lesson for the disciples. They're not so ready for the crucifixion thing. Here's what you were arguing about. Here's the right answer. Here's what it means to be great. So, in all 3 lessons, we got values, right? We've got, here's what it looks like to be a competent wife. We aren't going into all the self-deprecation stuff. There are values there about productivity and so on. We get into James, there are values. We get into the gospel, there are values. They're values from a different angle, each one of them, but they're values. Every day of our lives, we make, what, hundreds of decisions. I want to say thousands, that seems kind of big. Maybe, I don't know. Lots of decisions. Some of our decisions have become routine. or we have listened to too many people who tell us how we have to respond to something, or that we have no choice. We simply have to do it this way. We always have a choice. Always. It may be a choice we don't like. The answer may seem rampantly clear to us because of the choice, but there is always a choice. And our choices need to be driven by our values. I'm wondering if it's time to look at those decisions we make every day and to examine the values that those decisions are based on. Thanks be to God, there are only 45 more days until the election. There are those who will tell you that it is the most important decision you will ever make in your whole life. I don't think that's quite true. I think it's important. I don't think it's quite that important. There are other decisions I can think of far more important. That said, the same evaluation goes with that decision as with all the other decisions we make on a day-to-day basis. As you begin to live into this week, what decisions is it time to look at? What values are driving those decisions? If you're not 100% clear about that, think about this. What are you afraid will happen if you decide in a different way than what you have traditionally decided? That fear may give you some sense of where your values are and the values that are driving this decision making. As we live our life day to day to day, we have to have a routine. That's a given. There's just too much to get done. But it doesn't hurt every once in a while to pull that routine up and to look at the decisions that are inherent in that routine and look at the values upon which you base those decisions. It might be time for an adjustment. Might not. Maybe a little of both. James reminds the people he is writing to draw near to God, to submit themselves to God. James is not writing to pagans. James is writing to the Christian community and reminding them that it's not a one-shot deal. It's an ongoing conversion process. It's an ongoing refinement of how we walk the way of Jesus. We've had practice trying this stuff out. If this has worked, maybe it's time for some decisions to try something new, to decide differently. We need to submit ourselves to God, draw near to God. It's in relationship with God, in the power of the Holy Spirit, that we have the wisdom and the guidance and the courage sometimes to make different decisions than we've been making in the past, or to know when the decision needs to stay the same. It's an individual kind of work, but it contributes enormously to the community as we each work out our way of being on the way with Jesus.